Welcome back. According to the Blackfoot Treaty Number 7 chiefs, the unearthing of more than 200 children on the site of the former Kamloops residential school brings to light a continued struggle their people face towards reconciliation. In Alberta, more than 800 residential school students died, and advocates say it's time to find their graves. Pequanny Chief Stan Greer says in a statement, quote, "We are still seeking redress and closure on where our grandparents and great-grandparents are buried. For us, many of our ancestors attended the St. Joseph's Dunbow Industrial School that a lot of people did not want to talk about. But this story needs to be told." Greer adds that, quote, "Canada broke international laws against humanity and it must be held accountable nationally and internationally," end quote. And the discovery of this burial site may only be the tip of the iceberg. According to the health director for the Blackfoot Confederacy, Bonnie Healy says that the crumbling structures of former residential schools are starting to tell stories that have been kept hidden from us for decades.
There was a resort that was being that has been rebuilt from a residential school building and in construction. It at a time that I was staying there, it was shared with us that children's clothing was found in the walls, between the brick walls during construction. So there is a lot of discoveries that we are finding as buildings are collapsing. In our home community, our residential school building of St. Mary's burnt down a few years ago. And you make these discoveries with these types of transitions of old buildings.
A former minister who was kicked out of the United Church for shining a light on the atrocities of residential schools says he believes there should be an international inquiry into them in Canada. Kevin Annett wrote a book on the subject called Murder by Decree. He joins me now. Kevin, do you hope that the horrors which happened at these residential schools across Canada will now begin to be taken seriously?
I am hopeful, however, that the people who know, the Native people and those like me who've been working for many years, do have the evidence. It's actually been published for 13 years now, because I remember in 2008, after we held a tribunal 10 years earlier, where we began to bring out these crimes, a tribunal in Vancouver, we released a list of 28 mass grave sites to the Canadian government, to the police, to the media, and nobody ever followed up on that. It was totally ignored. But it named Kamloops. It named 14 of the 28 sites are in BC, 5 in Alberta. A lot of these mass graves are in the West, because that's where a lot of the residential schools were. And as we found, this is my book, murderbydecree.com. It's up online. It's been online for 7 years now. So for people to pretend that they didn't know this, I mean, it's just either willful ignorance or people like the government are openly lying when they say they didn't know these things. I mean, after all, they're the ones who put those kids in the ground. Of course they know where the graves are, right?
So, Kevin, where would you suggest investigators look next?
Don't forget, there are also mass graves at the Indian hospitals, like the Charles Council Hospital in Edmonton, the Prairie Training School in Red Deer, where they were bringing Native children en masse and sterilizing them. There was policies in Alberta and BC where you could sterilize any Native at the decision of the principals. So, for example, we have eyewitnesses saying that if they didn't go to church or if they kept speaking their language, they'd put them under an X-ray machine for 10 minutes. You know, the way the Nazis did in the death camps. They would just sterilize them with X-rays. A man, Jackson Steen, and 5 of his brothers in Alert Bay on Vancouver Island told me this. We sat down, they described how that happened to them. They were called the red tag boys. If you had high marks, you got a red tag and were sterilized. You know, there were certain schools like Kamloops that were, they were like special treatment centers where if children ran away a lot, they were sent there for a lot of punishment, and they were used in experiments, a lot of drug testing, medical experiments, things like that, that we've thoroughly documented, including from government documents that are confirming this stuff.
That was Kevin Annett, author of Murder by Decree. We'll have more with Mr. Annett on our show next week. Meanwhile, Alberta's Indigenous Relations Minister Rick Wilson announced that his government intends to fund research into the undocumented deaths and burials of hundreds of Indigenous children who did not make their way home. He says a funding announcement will be forthcoming over the next few days.
We have to come together and we have to grieve and we have to heal, and we have to find a way to come through this. Because the Indigenous people aren't going anywhere. We're not going anywhere. We have to work together, and we have to grieve, and we have to learn, and we have to heal, Mr. Speaker.
We need to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more. Stay with us.